Hi there, this is Steve Kimes with Meadow Nerds, and I'm talking today with Phillip Gulley about his book, Unlearning God. And if you're on the video, you can see this white blob. That is his book. Phillip Gulley, now, before I read Unlearning God, I didn't know that Phillip Gulley had written like a lot of books. He's written the Harmony novel series about a Quaker church, and which sounds actually really interesting, and I'll probably go and look that up after I'm done here. And then there's a book called Homeland Tales, and he's also written the nonfiction books If Grace Were True. He wrote that with James Mulholland, and also If the Church Were Christian. So today we're going to talk to him about Unlearning God. The full title is Unlearning God: How Unbelieving Helped Me Believe. So Phillip, let me just ask you, as a writer, how do you think of yourself? I mean, you've written a whole bunch of books, you've written novels, you've written nonfiction materials, you've written short stories, and do you see yourself primarily as a humorist, primarily as a storyteller, or do you primarily see yourself as writing whatever the heck comes up into your head? I see that one phrase that's been noted is you're the voice of small town America, which makes you sound like kind of a Quaker Garrison Keillor. So how do you, as a writer, how do you think of yourself?
Probably as a folk theologian. It's very important to me. When I studied theology in undergraduate and graduate school, I was often frustrated by how the theological language was incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't studied theology. And so I determined that when I preached and when I wrote, I would make sure that what I said was accessible to people, that it could be understood by anyone, that I wouldn't take them into the thicket of theological jargon and leave them there, that I would communicate as clearly and simply as I could about profound matters. And I suspect that's why my books have have appealed to such a broad group of people, because you don't need a PhD to understand them, but they do. Hopefully, I hope this is what happens, cause us to think about things a bit more deeply.
So you like to take kind of profound theological ideas and try to simplify them and make them more accessible to everyday people.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great. That is a great goal. I, as a pastor myself, I have kind of the same goal, although
you do that every Sunday, don't you?
I try to, although I suspect that I don't think that I'm quite as successful as you as actually trying to get it down into some basic language that everybody will understand. But but yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of pastors try to do. But I think that that you do a really good job, at making making things accessible.
I enjoy doing it.
I can tell, actually. I love the humor that you put into things. It's really good.
Thank you.
So in your book Unlearning God, you talk a lot about kind of your past experience and some of the different communities that you were in. So what are some of the different spiritual communities or communities that you've been in, that you've lived in for a while?
Well, I grew up in the same town where I still live, in Danville, Indiana, just west of Indianapolis. And for the first 15 years of my life, attended a Roman Catholic church. My family was Catholic, and Mom would take us to Catholic Mass every Sunday. Kind of got a double dose of it, because she was also the principal of the Catholic school in the next town over. And so I was really immersed deeply in this Roman Catholic tradition. But when I was 15, my parents gave me this huge gift. They said, up until now, you have honored our religious wishes. Now it is time to find yours. And said, if you no longer wish to go to church, that's fine. If you wish to attend another church, that is fine too. So I didn't go anywhere for a year or so. And then a family moved in next door to us who were Quakers. And they were in charge of the youth group at the local Quaker meeting. And one Sunday evening in the spring, I was sitting on our front porch watching as carload after carload of attractive young Quaker teenage girls pulled up at our neighbor's house for youth group. And I distinctly heard the voice of God say, go be a Quaker. And so I did. I went over, I knocked on the door, they invited me in, and I never left. I continued to return every Sunday evening, began attending meeting for worship. And then when I moved away from Danville, I continued my affiliation with the Quakers, and at the age of 23 became a Quaker minister, and then started my studies with undergraduate degrees and then on to graduate school.
Now, in the book, it also talks about some association you've had with Baptist congregations. Has that been a big part of your life, or not so much?
Well, my sister kind of paved the way for my heretical breach and break from the Quaker Church. She was 4 years older, and when she turned 15, she announced to Mom and Dad that she would be going to the Baptist Church. Many of her friends grew up there. And it was a fundamental Baptist church, and they absolutely rejoiced when she joined the church that she had been snatched from the arms of the Roman Catholic Church and carried to the safe shores of the Baptist faith. But well, I would say, I was going to say back then there was a lot of tension between the Baptists and the Catholics, but there still is.
Well, there is, but it's not like the same as it used to be. It used to be that both the Catholics and the Baptists would just say, well, you're just going to hell because you're part of the wrong group. And I don't think that's so much the case anymore.
Well, that is true. It is a bit different, and they've managed to unite around similar social issues like the pro-life movement and some other things. And I think that has brought them closer than they were historically.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. They've found some places of agreement, and I think also like I know that in our local communities, Baptists and Catholics, and also some Quakers and Mennonite groups, we would all work together to help the poor.
Certainly.
And that is a great ecumenical movement there.
And that has just happened in our lifetime. That kind of cooperation would have been unthinkable when I was growing up in the Roman Catholic Church. Everyone had their territories carved out, and never the twain shall meet, and that has changed, and I think that is wonderful. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, really, the theology hasn't really changed, but the attitudes of different denominations has radically changed.
Well, I think probably because of a lot of intermarriage going on. I know the Quaker meeting I pastor has a lot of folks come there because maybe a Catholic married a Jewish person, and so we become the alternative, the safe middle where they can meet. So I think intermarriage has helped that a lot, which might be why our ancestors fought intermarriage so strenuously, because they didn't want their religion diluted. But I think that dilution has been a good thing.
I agree with you. Have you ever seen the movie? It's a Danish movie called Ordet.
No.
That's what that whole movie is about. It's based on this whole idea that these people can't get along and they refuse to let their children marry each other because they feel like it's going to water down their belief.
Oh yeah.
It's, if you ever have a chance to watch that movie, the ending is one of the most exhilarating endings I've ever seen, and I think you would love it if you could get through the beginning part. So, okay, so so if you had different exposures to different groups, how do you think that that's caused you to grow as a person, and especially as a pastor? How do you think that has that been a good thing, or would you prefer have not had the Catholic or background or the exposure to the Baptist?
Well, it has certainly caused me to appreciate what each tradition brings to the table. It has also caused me, on the other hand, to be sometimes skeptical of religious faith. Since I've been exposed to wide varieties of its expression, I've noticed the same tendencies in all of them, despite their claims, that even among progressive communities and movements, there exists a certain kind of fundamentalism whose object is different than the conservative fundamentalism I've also encountered, but is just as rigid and must be guarded against. This disease of certainty, which I talk about in Unlearning God, that seems to affect almost all religions I've encountered. This cancer of certainty that this is the truth, and I've after a lifetime of seeking, I've found it, and I know it. Now, some movements articulate that a bit more kindly than others, but I've noticed its presence in almost every branch, in almost every affiliate, just underneath the surface in some, but still very much present. And
don't you think that? I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
Well, and as I say in the book, I think that's one of the things that we need to unlearn. This conviction that we alone have the truth.
But don't you think that that certainty, that for almost all Christian groups, that's what they equate to be faith? That faith is certainty, being sure of what you cannot see. Right. And so they're saying, well, we have to hold on to this, because if we don't, if we question some of the basic principles that we have, that we're basically undermining our own faith.
Right. And I would suggest to them that is why faith is a poor object of religion. That the object of religion should not be faith and belief. The object of religion should be compassion and a commitment to our growth and happiness, and the growth and happiness of the beloved, of the other. So anytime where faith is the object of a religion, I think it sets itself up for this kind of rigidity. I think that's probably why Jesus didn't talk about doctrine a lot, because he sensed that right acting was more important than right thinking. But you're right. It's clear that, at least as far as American Christianity is concerned, we have posited the greater value on faith, belief, creedal agreement and doctrinal truth, and that I believe those are misguided objects of religion.
But that's pretty much the whole object of mainline Christianity from the Nicene Creed.
Sure.
In the 4th century. I mean, sure. This is the building blocks of what we normally call Orthodox Christianity, and they would say that they're getting that from Jesus, because Jesus also talked about faith and about how central faith is, and how people were being healed because of their faith, and people were being saved because of their faith. But you're saying, oh, no, it's not about faith. It's actually about compassion. And
I would say that when those elders gathered in Nicaea, that the social impulse behind that was not so much about identifying and preserving a faith, but establishing a power and authority, which would then, and coincidentally, it involved their authority. That authority worked, that is, to their benefit, since they were the elders, and that their time in Nicaea could have been spent on better things. I'll say it that way. And if it had, the church, I believe, would have been a radically different community.
So just to put this in kind of terms that Mennonites, in more Mennonite terms, for the people who are listening or whatever, what you're saying is that concept of faith is a part of Constantinianism and a part of the whole empire building that they were a part of at the time.
I believe it was, especially when that faith is linked to a required affirmation of doctrines and creeds, which I think was the genius of the Anabaptist movement, which seemed to me, along with the Quakers, to say, no, it's about compassion. It's about how we live in the blessed community, how we live and negotiate this world, this life, and which I think was the genius of the Anabaptist movement and the early Quaker movement.
It's Anabaptists and Mennonites have had an interesting relationship with faith and how to deal with that and doctrine. Right now we have statements that we call confessions.
Right.
This is where our community is at right now. We are confessing this, and we recognize that this isn't where we were at 50 years ago, and 50 years from now, it's probably not where we're going to be at then either. But right now, this is what we are confessing.
Right.
And
when you're honest, you quickly admit that not everyone in your community of faith can make those confessions in good faith. That they themselves do not agree with those confessions. I suspect that pastoring Mennonites is a bit like pastoring Quakers. One feels like they're herding cats.
Isn't that like any church? I'm not sure. In talking to other pastors, I think that they express similar frustrations.
Yes, I think so.
So when we talk about the direction of so your book and all that is talking about what it is that you need to unlearn in order to draw closer to God. Is that a fair way of summarizing your book?
It's about the things I had to unlearn.
Okay, right.
Yeah, in order to continue to believe in God. And so
like now there's a there's a good Baptist writer, J.B. Phillips, who wrote the book "Your God Is Too Small," which a lot of people talk about, and that whole idea is a lot of times the basic problem that we have with God is we're thinking too small about God. Would you agree with that statement or not?
Oh, yes. And I read that book years ago, and there's a reason it's a classic. His point is well taken. Yeah.
And so do you think that, and so I talk to a lot of people and they say, well, yeah, we don't want to think that God isn't in control of everything, or that God isn't too strong to do whatever it is that I'm doing here. Is that your idea of God being too small?
Yes, and that book helped me realize too that the human effort to understand God is always going to be a flawed effort. That I don't think there's ever been anyone who has perfectly captured the essence of God, the totality of God, the summation of ultimate reality, if you want to sound like a theologian. I just don't think there's anybody who's done that. Now, the Christians would say, well, Jesus did that. And I would say, well, maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. And maybe what makes Jesus different from us is that his yes to God was rich and full in a way our yes to God has not been. And thus his yes to God empowered him, enabled him to act with courage, with dignity, with a real passion for humanity and a love for the other and the ostracized. And that this is the difference. But what he did, we can do too. Not because he was God, but because his yes was more complete than our yes. And when our yes to God is that complete, then we will be like Christ. Which Jesus kind of inferred, you'll do greater things than I've done. Yeah.
I think that's excellent. I gained one idea of a theme in your book that I would like to explore a little bit. It seems to me like there's a lot of people telling you all the different paths that people can take to get to hell. Like you mentioned one question, or you make that question, that's going to send you to hell, or you think one thing and that's going to. How many different ways do you think that people have told you about all these different paths to go to hell?
Oh, I probably hear one or two a day. And I'm
what are some of these things that you've heard about?
So 57 times 365 times 2. It's a lot.
And that seems to be a pretty decisive way to tell people that that what they're thinking about is wrong by telling them that they're going to go to hell for it.
Oh yeah, the funny thing is, the most common one has been thinking for yourself. Which I've been told will get you in trouble every time. And in my way of thinking and understanding this, thinking for yourself is when the true journey begins. When you're able to break out and begin to really reflect and think deeply about things that the church has tried to convince you could not be thought about differently. That the real journey begins when you begin to think for yourself.
The thinking for yourself leads to questions, and questions are dangerous, don't you know?
Yes, they are dangerous, but they're fun.
Um, so all of these people who say, well, this is going to send you to hell, or that's going to send you to hell, or you're going to hell, or you are the devil incarnate, and all that. So for all these people to say that, does that mean that it seems to me like they're being very very judgmental? Does that mean that they're going to hell?
Well, since I don't believe in hell, I'd say no.
And why don't you believe in hell? I know that's a different book, but
Yeah. Well, when one studies the formation of the theology of hell, one begins to understand that it was devised as a weapon to place great fear in people so that they would obey. They would obey the authorities. And I'm just suspicious of any belief that has its origins in the desire to control and exert authority over others. That's one reason. The other reason, and perhaps the most personal reason for me, is that the God I've experienced is unswervingly committed to the well-being of all people, both on this side of the grave and after the grave. If there is anything after the grave, we don't know. We're only speculating. But that the God I've experienced seems to me to be unswervingly committed to the well-being of all people. And just as I would never wish for my children eternal punishment or separation, I don't for a minute believe that God could desire or do that either.
Now, I personally don't believe in hell in the way that it's usually conceived or presented, whether it be Jonathan Edwards' little spider that's being held over flames, or
Right.
anything like that. Those give me shivers, and not in a good way. But at the same time, I wonder just about the general idea of judgment or separation. And the reason I do is because, from the perspective of people who have suffered terribly because of others, for other people in authority. So you have people who have been oppressed, and they might look at hell in a very different way, or either hell or being separated, that they can have a resurrection, and then they don't have to worry about these other people who have been oppressing them their entire life, that they're going to come back and they're going to oppress them again in eternity. And so it seems to, so it just, and that's something that I get from like Psalm 37 and things like that. It's just people who finally have the freedom from the oppression and from the people who had been squashing them, and that they could never obtain any freedom from them.
Yeah, and a new heaven and new earth, and there'll be neither crying nor sorrow any longer. Sure, right. That's a powerful imagery. I just don't think that comes at the expense of the people we hate. I think if there is an afterlife, and if there is a God who oversees that afterlife, then that God is able to help each of us grow, to live as new people, and to mend that which has been broken. I do not have to see my enemies crushed in order to be happy. And I've lived long enough to have people do very cruel and hateful things to me and those I love. But my happiness is not predicated on their punishment. I might feel differently if I were a Jewish person who had gone through the Holocaust and lost all of his family. But by the same token, I have met and talked with people who've had that happen, and I have been astounded at their desire for and their yearning and their hope for restoration of all creation, including those who mistreated them and those they loved. That's why this theme of grace is just so important to me, and one I return to often. That if there were no grace, the emotion you described would certainly be understandable. But grace changes all of that. It empowers us to live as new people with people we once despised. Absent that, I don't know how we're going to do it.
It's part of what I think about is just the practical aspect of it, and I wonder when, or if we saw power structures completely reversed, like what we see Jesus talking about.
Yeah.
When we see power structures reversed, if we might see people's hearts remarkably changed and see people do very different things than they do now.
Perhaps, yes.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really enjoyed in your book were Christian cliches that people use so often that they might think that they're from the Bible.
Yeah.
One of them is you talked a little bit about the phrase love the sinner, hate the sin.
Oh, yes, yes.
So why do you have a problem with that? I mean, hey, loving sinners, that's a good thing. So why is there a problem with that phrase?
Because I've never seen the object of that love really feel that love. When a gay person has said, we hate the sin but love the sinner, I've never heard a gay person respond, oh, thank you, that makes me feel so loved. I just never have done it. What often happens when we say that is that the people we say it to feel diminished, feel contempt, feel as if they're despised and somehow beyond the reach of God's love. I just don't know how to pull off that saying sincerely in a way that makes the sinner feel as if they are loved.
Well, I think I can see that phrase being used in a context where the sinner also hates their sin. So, for instance, a person who's addicted to drugs. I've seen a lot of people in there, and they're just like, they don't mind the approach of love the sinner, hate the sin, because they also hate their sin. They also hate what it is that they're doing, and they want to get out of that.
But the popularity of that saying in recent years, and the focus of that saying has been directed toward person's sexuality, which is a different matter altogether than one's addictions. If I'm a drug addict, I may well despise the power drugs have over me, and hate the drugs for that, while simultaneously craving the drug. So it's a bit of an irony there. But if I am gay, and if something happened in my fetal development that caused this attraction to my same gender, then how do I hate that without also hating myself? Yeah. I never heard the phrase hate the sinner and love the sinner directed toward addicts.
I have.
Whenever I've heard it, it's almost always about gay people.
And that seems to be a misnomer because because to be gay is actually a part of one's identity, not just an action that one does.
Right. Yeah.
And so to say love the sinner, hate the sin in that context is basically saying hate the sin, which is the same as hating the sinner, or
right.
hate that person's identity, and so you're hating that person.
Exactly.
So it's just hypocritical.
How are the Mennonites dealing with that issue?
Oh, it depends on the Mennonite.
Yeah, same with Quakers.
Right. Yeah. No. I noticed that there are. I noticed that with the Quakers that there's certain meetings that are sharply divided, and that's the same with the Mennonite conferences. They're
yes. In your
very
area of
sharply
Portland,
divided.
Northwest Yearly Meeting sexuality. Now, they didn't phrase it that way. They said it was a split about biblical authority. But the only topic they were arguing about was homosexuality. So it was a disingenuous argument, I think. Yeah.
Right. Well, and we're having a similar issue. I've tried to argue for some unity in that we actually are required. We're all required to absolutely love homosexuals, and we may even approach that differently, but we still have to maintain unity in our disagreement. And different people have had different points of view on that.
Sure.
And so it's such all denominations are having to face this, and I don't wonder if we're going to see some divisions and unifyings of different church groups along these lines.
Yeah,
at least
maybe one day there'll be a Quaker night or a Mennowers. It's an amalgamation of Mennonites and Quakers who think alike.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because the congregation who I've joined, actually, we have really excellent relationship with our Quakers brothers and sisters, and there's actually there's a Quaker church across the street, and they also own there's a Quaker school that owns the building that we are meeting in, that my congregation used to own, but they sold it to the Quaker school. So anyway, yeah. We love our fellow peace churches. We do.
Well, there you go.
Oh, what was it I was going to say about that? No, I don't remember. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to move on. If I can remember, then I'll say it later. Okay, so what about the cliche, God has a wonderful plan for your life? So does God have a wonderful plan for our lives? Or is it just pastors who have a wonderful plan for our lives? And as a pastor, you have a wonderful plan for each individual in your congregation.
Yeah, I would like to take the fellow who first coined the phrase, God has a plan for your life, and in a very loving, pacifist way, wring his neck.
Wasn't that Bill Bright? Isn't that like the first phrase in the four spiritual laws?
One saying contribute to such misery. When people who have very difficult lives think it's because they have failed to find God's unique plan for their life. What I do believe is true is that God has a hope for creation, that God has a hope for humanity, and that hope is, while specific, the path to it is wide, and within that path we have much freedom to pursue things, vocations that bring us great joy, to love people who complete us in a sense, and that there is no one answer. For instance, one person I must marry or I will be miserable. One job I must do or I will be wasting my time. and thwarting the will of God. It's just nonsense, but it's common nonsense, and a lot of people believe it and use that kind of language. You know.
It's really just kind of a form of bringing fatalism back into Christianity.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, to just say there's this very narrow path, and we just need to seek God until we find out what that narrow path is.
Yeah, and I really bought into this until one time early in my marriage, I said to my wife, well, I'm so glad I found you. I don't know who I would have married if you hadn't come along. I would have been miserable. She said, you'd have found somebody else. And at first I thought, well, what do you mean? And then the more I thought about it, I thought, yeah, she's right. I would have found somebody else and probably been just as happy. We've been married 34 years. I love the stuffings out of her, and I'm reasonably confident she loves me. But she is a mature human being, and consequently, I think could have happy relationships with a number of people if it had come to that. So,
after all, even if your wife is only one in a million, you still have thousands of other options.
That's right. With 6.5 billion people in the world, there's.
Although sometimes I wonder, I will say that sometimes I think, I don't know how many other people there are that actually be able to put up with me as much as my wife does. One other thing that I wanted to talk about is you talk about sacraments and how, for instance, when you were in the Catholic Church, you were taught that there were 7 sacraments, and then you talked to the Baptist Church and there were 2 sacraments, and now you're in the Quaker Church, and it seems like a lot of people think that the Quaker Church has no sacraments. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's a misnomer about Quakerism. Quakerism, while rejecting the sacramental practices, didn't really say there are no sacraments. They said everything is sacrament. Everything has the potential. Every outward act has the potential to point to some inward truth. So it's not 7 or 2 or 5 or 0. It's everything can be sacramental if we have the ability and the willingness to see the inward reality, the inward truth, the deeper truth it points to and it represents. So a sunset is sacramental, a baby is sacramental, an old person is sacramental, tree is sacramental, the sky, everything has the potential to point to some great ineffable beauty and truth. Yeah.
And it seems to me like the action of sacrament is actually the love of the God presence in the other, or like how Martin Buber put it, the thou,
right.
in the other, whether that be a tree or a person or a baby or an old person. If we recognize the divine in that other person and treat that other person with the respect of the divine that's in them, then we are being sacramental at that moment.
That's right. That's a sacramental moment. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess you would say that, or maybe the Quaker approach is that everything potentially has every moment has a potential of being sacramental.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So when I hear someone in my meeting say, Quakers don't have sacraments, au contraire. We do. And I give that sermon about once a year because it's something we tend to forget. Yeah.
Is it true though that Quakers don't see as much that the physical manifestation of the sacraments are as essential as other denominations.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Now, this is one thing that Mennonites and Quakers a lot of times have a disagreement about, because Mennonites hold baptism very dear. We think that baptism is kind of really important. So just
and Quakers would say baptism is important too, but that it is the inward act of baptism that is essential, and not the outward water. The old Quakers used to say, if one's inward heart and spirit is not changed, the outward water means nothing. And I think the Mennonites would say that too.
Oh, certainly.
That without the inward washing, the outward washing matters little. Yeah.
And the way that we express it is we talk about believer's baptism. Correct. That it is a person who has been already washed that goes through the ceremony of baptism. The ceremony is important. We wouldn't necessarily say essential, but it is very important to go through the ceremony. But it is the inward washing that makes that ceremony important.
And that has already occurred.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe just the early Quakers just had a fear of water. Who knows?
So let me just ask you, if there was a Mennonite who was interested in finding out more about Quakers or more about the whole Friends movement, is there a book or something else, some other resource that you would recommend to them?
Well, it sounds kind of arrogant, but I'll say I wrote a book about that called Living the Quaker Way. That is both a history and kind of a primer of Quaker thought. Came out a couple of years ago, and so if people wanted to pursue that a bit, they could read that book, Living the Quaker Way, or they could go to Quaker.org, which is a collection of a bunch of different Quakers from all around the world who contribute, and there are chat rooms in there and forums, and it's just a really neat website, Quaker.org.
And I definitely recommend for anybody who's a Mennonite, and if you don't know much about Quakers, I highly recommend finding out. The history is very different from Anabaptist, and the beginning of the Quakers is separate from the Anabaptist, but it is amazing how many parallels that God was leading these two very different groups in very similar directions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Quakers are not Anabaptists, but we hold many things in common with our Anabaptist kin. Yeah.
Amen. That is absolutely true. Yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap things up. Is there anything that you wanted to conclude with there, Phillip?
You've covered it nicely. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's great to talk to you. Once again, so pick up the book Unlearning God, or pick up one of Phillip's other books. I am almost certainly going to pick up the Harmony novels and take a look at those. Which is the first Harmony novel that I should look at, Phillip?
First one in that series is a little book called Home to Harmony.
All right, I will look that up and read it, and I'll see if my wife would like to read it too. It sounds like it's up her alley.
Good visiting with you. Thank you for the visit.
All right. And so thank you, everybody. And may the Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace.
Hey, everyone. This is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at menonerds.com. It's the hub for all things Menonerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, And we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have two options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out menonerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.